Aereon Cusith of Krank. Water cascades over the cliff and pounds into the turbulence below. The land beyond flattens and calms the river. The Juta bends around hills as the course gently guides it. The land leaves the hills behind and sprouts forests in their stead. The Juta's current grows strong again, but its flow is attenuated as its water becomes contaminated with salt. The river's final act, before it becomes nothing in the great seas of the world, is to split its mouth around the kingdom of Krank. Krank didn't start out life as a kingdom. Once it was just an island, before it even had a name, back when things were simpler. A little eroding here, a little depositing there, all very manageable. Humans arrived with their needs and wants, and things got complicated. For many centuries the island remained isolated from the world of men, protected by the fact that no human in their right mind would attempt to reach it. The girth of the Juta was too great, and its current too strong. Yet stories were told of a couple who fell into the river far upstream, and the option of choosing to leave land and swim to Krank was taken from them. The Juta quickly swept them away and into the powerful turmoil in the heart of the river. The tales say the couple fought to get back to the mainland, but the undercurrent proved too strong. The pair had nothing left but hope when they spied the island and poured all their remaining strength into reaching it. Exhausted, they dragged themselves onto the sandy shores. Life had made its way to the island long before they had so much as dipped a toe into the Juta. In its centre was an oasis of trees and grasses. Many animals also called it home, including a colony of seals and a rampant species of boar. The happy couple, without a means of getting back to their previous life, began to populate the island and build a civilization. Thankfully, the story is not concerned with the mechanics of how two people go about populating an island. Some things are best left unsaid. In the decades that followed, the branches and trunks of trees were mutilated to make way for the village. Apple trees were spared from the cull, but any talking reptiles would surely have been eradicated. The residents of Krank were a simple folk, concerned with how many fish were being caught daily, or what Janet next door had been fighting with her husband about, not complicated things like the world. There was a resident, however, who didn't give a mackerel about Janet's drama. Aereon was getting dressed. On a grander scale, he was in the process of storing up several growth spurts in the hope of a big push in his late teens. For now, his order was in the post, and most people his age had several inches on him. Things didn't improve from that note for Aereon. He was currently enduring a particularly spotty phase of his life, and his hair always seemed to sit as though it had been crudely cut by his mother, and it was. The woman herself was trying to make sure Aereon ate something before he left the house. "I can't, mother. I have a lot of people to speak to today, and I'm late enough as it is," said Aereon, tying his shoes. She screwed up her face at him. It was a kind face, with warm eyes. She and Aereon's father had found each other at a young age, and produced Aereon at almost his equal of young age, meaning his mother still bore her youthful looks. His father had aged more noticeably, going grey early in life, but he still possessed the keen energy of a young man. "At least take something with you then," said his mother. "Like what?" "A sandwich," she suggested. Aereon pouted, but conceded. "Is there a sandwich for me?" "Of course there isn't. I don't just have sandwiches lying around just in case you happen to want one. I'll have to make it up." "Mum," protested Aereon, "I don't have time." "It will only take a moment," she replied with a wave of a hand, while making her way to a chopping board. "I don't have time for this," Aereon mumbled and made his way to the door. "Stay," commanded his mother, with her back to him. Aereon did as he was told, and within a moment he was holding a freshly made sandwich. He turned to leave and his mother coughed at him. "Excuse me?" "Thank you," said Aereon, whilst thinking there was something slightly off about the whole affair. "That's better. Now make sure you eat it." "I will," he said, "and have a good day." He didn't answer that. Instead he accepted his mother's hug before heading out the door. Aereon walked from his house until it was out of sight, and only then did he start eating. It wasn't the worst start to the day he'd had, and the rest didn't promise to be especially bad. The streets were paved with sand and dirt that blew into people's eyes in the wind. Barely constructed houses lined the sandy pathways and collected drifts of grains at their foundations, making them look as though they'd stemmed from the deeper depths of the island. Krankians leaned heavily towards a meat-filled diet, so it was unsurprising that the first food producer Aereon reached was a butcher. Around the back he found the pens. He knocked on the door and waited for the butcher. Breng was his name, and he strolled out with puffed cheeks. "Good morning, sir," said Aereon, at the sight of him. "How's business?" he added, not waiting for an answer before he reached out into his shoulder bag and pulled out a board, extracted a page of parchment, a quill, and a porcelain inkpot. He gave the pens a quick once-over. "Your livestock seems healthy enough. I'm not sure if the word has reached you. I am here on official business," he said, tapping his parchment. Breng's face suggested he was mildly aware of the situation. "Good. I just have a quick survey to complete. Shouldn't take long. Then I'll let you get back to whatever it is you do all day. So, first question, simple one. What is your inventory?" The look was impassive. Aereon tried again. "How many animals do you have?" Breng scratched his thinning hair. "What you see is what you get." Aereon looked over the animals with his critical clipboard pressed to his chest. "What, you mean this is it?" Breng drummed his thumbs on the wooden posts. "That's about the size of it." Aereon looked again, shook his head and started filling in his chart. "Her over there, she's pregnant," Breng added helpfully. "And that one. But other than that, there isn't an awful lot going on. I've tried persuading some of the others to, you know, don't you?" Being in his mid-teens, Aereon was aware of the subject matter Breng was referring to, but, being in his mid-teens, actually had very little grasp of any of the concrete facts. He nodded. "But when they don't want to, they don't want to. And I've about run out of time." "How many females do you have?" 17, said Breng, "and 4 males. Aereon jotted down the numbers. "I've tried gutting the older females." Aereon's fist went to his lips and pressed them shut as he swallowed a bit of bile. "And some of my smaller males, but demand is high." Breng wiped his brow and took a deep breath. "It's getting to the stage if I want to remain in business, I might need to close up shop for a while, to replenish the numbers, so to speak. I will pass on your concerns." Aereon returned his items to his bag and left. It wasn't the start to the day he'd hoped for, and as he headed to the next butcher, he felt an unmistakable sense of foreboding. Sure enough, when Aereon arrived at the next paddock, the butcher there told him much the same thing, as did the next, and the one after that. Aereon looked down at his deflatingly bare spreadsheet. He crossed to the other side of the island to inquire at one of the main green growers. The man led him through the small orchard. Some of the trees were in bloom, others bore fruits, more looked healthy enough, just out of season. Aereon inspected the fruit. "How's business?" he asked. "Steady," said the gardener. Aereon took out his materials and began taking down numbers. "You know how it is. This trade doesn't draw the same numbers as meat, but I have a regular set of customers." "Aha," said Aereon. "And suppose you had an increase in customers. How would you feel about that?" "Well, more business is good business, right?" smiled the man. "Yes, for the most part," Aereon said carefully. "But just for sake of argument, let's suppose it was a dramatic increase, as in, I don't know, let's say all other options were gone. There was no meat left. Do you think the other green growers and yourself would be able to support Krank?" The man scratched his chin. "Well, I can't speak for the others, but I'd be very surprised if we could handle that sort of pressure." "Very well." Aereon tucked his notes back into his bag and turned to leave. "Aereon?" "Yes," he said, turning back to the orchard. That was all theoretical, right?" the grower asked hopefully. "Oh yes, of course. Totally theoretical. Purely academic." Aereon scanned the orchard. "Maybe plant a couple more seedlings. Good day." That hadn't been as fruitful as he'd hoped. There was another butcher just around the corner, but before he could get there someone called his name. He knew the voice well and instinctively hunkered down behind a group of passing people. But the voice came again and clearly explained it could still see him hiding behind the people. Aereon stood up. "What are you playing at?" the voice complained. "And where have you been? I've been looking for you all over." The voice belonged to Eden, one of the creators. He wore slimming clothes and a smug smile. His hair always flicked up into a perfect quiff. He was tall and thin by Krank standards, and his clothes and hair made him seem even taller and thinner. "I've been working," Aereon said. "I need you to take a message for me," said Eden, paying no attention to Aereon's reply. Aereon looked up the street. He knew exactly who the message was for. "You can take it yourself. You know where he is." "I do not take messages." "You take messages. I do more important things. In fact, it's because of people like me doing more important things that people like you exist." "Following so far?" "Tell him we have completed the task he set us," finished Eden. The task, which had been set to them a couple months back, was to come up with a method of prolonging and ideally sustaining Krank's food supply. Aereon hadn't had much faith in their success from the beginning. The creators had little in the way of what he would call credentials. So a few of their designs over the years had actually worked. That was just law of averages. The problem was, they were putting all their eggs and Krank's eggs in one basket with just one invention. Aereon liked to believe in things a little more real. Like numbers. You could believe in numbers. Numbers were reliable. So despite Eden's boasts, Aereon's scepticism remained. "I am busy, already running errands. Can't you tell him yourself?" "No," Eden told him. "As I've said, I do not do that sort of thing. But this is precisely the sort of thing that is in your job description. So off you pop." Eden shovelled his hands at Aereon, who sighed. "That's the spirit. Go and tell him. I'll be watching to see if you don't run all the way." Aereon looked at him, wondering if he was serious. Apparently he was. Aereon ran all the way. Eden was a man likely to make good on his threats. It was not a long run. His legs did not burn by the end of it, but his face did. He knocked on the door, and the creeping recesses of his brain began to suspect that this was not going to be a pleasant day after all. "Enter!" boomed a voice from within. Inside, the King of Krank sat at the table, nursing his stomach. "Ah, Aereon," he said, wiping his mouth. "Finished with your counting?" "I have not. Aereon had constructed a makeshift speech to explain the situation, but before he could be given a chance to spiel, the Queen interrupted. "You have not," she said simply, but with consequential undertones if Aereon was not careful with his answer. Queen Arborella was not a citizen of Krank. By her own terms, citizens were something that should remain underneath you. She was slender, tall, beautiful, with incredibly long legs, and perhaps most importantly, she was cunning. All key features which had directly led to her ascension to Queen. All features which, if anyone else possessed, they quickly found that in fact they did not. Arborella wore a sealskin dress, the only person in the kingdom to own such a luxury, mainly due to the fact that she had waited until the last seal had been slaughtered before she decided she wanted the garment made. There were mixed feelings about Arborella's attire amongst Krankians. Half of them liked it because it didn't leave much to the imagination, and the other half hated it because it didn't leave much to the imagination and they didn't have one. Recently she had added a splash of colour to her look, something she usually didn't care for, but in this case, her crimson fingernails seemed wholly appropriate. There were two words that did not fall into everyday use in Krank's vocabulary: style and class, and they both applied to her. King Kodrich, by contrast, was neither classy nor stylish. He wasn't tall, he didn't have incredibly long legs, he certainly wasn't slender, and he wasn't cunning. He was broad, and often found in a tavern having a few drinks with the creators. Arborella had to commend them, for their antics did have an entertaining quality, mainly because something would invariably go wrong and usually result in someone getting grievously injured. Although she wouldn't say that she enjoyed their company. Kodrich, on the other hand, adored them. He was constantly being enchanted by their grossly exaggerated stories, whereas the Queen found them quite preposterous. Truth be told, Kodrich was basically the anti-Arborella, which made him immensely popular. The people of Krank seemed to know that their king was slightly off. They were also more than aware that their queen was slightly malevolent. Even so, the kingdom was fairly relaxed about its rulers' idiosyncrasies, given the last ones had insisted on the death penalty, and the ones before them had encouraged human sacrifices. Aereon considered very carefully what he was about to say. "I have not," he repeated. "I was held up. That seemed like a good start. Then redirected." "Redirected?" Less good. "You do not get redirected. said the Queen. "The king directs you, and you do as he says, lest you wish to be taken downstairs." Normally the Queen did not care what Codrich did with Aereon, but seeing as it had been her idea to have him ask around and find out how much food was left, she was not happy about him frivolously tossing it to the side. "Yes, it does relate to my work. I think it will be of great importance to him, the king, sire, and something you would want to know right away." "You shouldn't think so much, or trust for that matter. Just a friendly piece of advice," said Arborella. "I shall keep that in mind for future reference, my queen." Aereon turned to Codrich. "As I was saying, I was redirected in my duties. Eden came looking for me." The chair creaked as the king craned forward. "Whatever they have been working on, it's finished, your majesty." From the moment he had devised the plan, before he'd even revealed it to the curators, the king had been eagerly anticipating the momentous occasion when they would reveal their results, but he maintained appropriate royal decorum and grace with a quick "Youpee!" before cannoning through the door with a teenage boy galloping behind him, leaving Arborella looking completely underwhelmed. Codrich was staring up at the plaque above the crater's door when Aereon arrived. "The fire of ambition burns bright." Aereon never went in for that sort of thing. It was a bit flowery for his taste. The king nodded to his servant, and after a moment of straightening his clothes and filling his lungs with precious oxygen, Aereon responded with 3 very precise knocks on the door. No answer. Aereon knocked again, this time a little harder. Still there was no answer. The scald of irritation prickled across the back of his neck. Not only had he been given specific instructions to be back as soon as possible, but he could also feel the vibrations of Codrich's tapping foot behind him. Bringing his arm back in a huge arc, Aereon prepared to swing. As he brought his clenched knuckles forward, taking his body with it, the door swung in on itself. Just as Aereon hit the ground, Eden jumped from behind the door and rushed out to greet Codrich. "Impeccable timing," he said, shaking the king's unresisting hand, before turning to address the heap in his doorway. "Oh, do get up, Aereon. You're making the place look untidy." Inside was untidy. Huge mounds of half-invented inventions scaled to the roof. Occasionally a finished item stood tall and proud in a small clearing, often adorned with a little label reading something like "Future Wonder of the World." A long water channel ran from the far wall of the building to the middle of the room. At the end a door led to the estuary. Eden led Codrich through the scrap maze, and Aereon followed. All 3 reached the channel without knocking anything over. Sitting next to it was what looked like a peaked wooden roof of a very narrow building. Granted, the ridge in the middle wasn't that sharp, and the whole shape had a more curved quality to it. Codrich looked down at what the craters had produced. "What is it?" he asked. "It is of course the Floyency," came a voice from a junk pile. "Oh, a Floyency," said Codrich slowly. "No, the Floyency," corrected the junk. "Yes, quite, sorry. What is the Floyency?" "An excellent question," said Cole, appearing from the mess. He was broad-shouldered with short dark hair and wore a pair of dungarees and big boots. "But first," he said, approaching the trio, "remind me what it was you asked of myself and Eden." "To find a way of providing more food for the people of my kingdom," said Codrich. After a moment's thought, he added, "And me, obviously." "Yes," began Cole, "and after some deliberation we concluded that there was no means of doing so on this island." "We tried everything," said Eden. "We even went to all the butchers to see if there was any way of invigorating the animals. Nothing worked." Codrich slumped. "Oh. I really thought if anyone had a shot at it, it would have been you two." "But," said Eden cheerily, "we came up with something much more better. A way to leave Krank and go further afield for food. You've seen the land beyond." "Yes," said the king, intrigued. "Well, this is our way of getting there," said Eden smugly. "I see," said Codrich, looking at the Floyency in fascination. "How does it work? Does it fly above the water in some ingenious way?" "No, better," said Cole. "Does it catapult you?" "Better than that too," claimed Eden. Aereon had his doubts. At that moment he could envisage few things more appealing than seeing the craters catapulted off of Krank. There would be no way of getting back if that were the case, said Cole. He knew this because the idea had been discussed at length before eventually it being scrapped. Ah yes, of course, said Codrich. I give in, boys. How does it work? He looked at the Floyncy while tilting his head to the side. It floats, the creators spoke in unison, grinning from ear to ear. Together they lifted and flipped the Floyncy before lowering it into the channel, where it bobbed up and down pleasantly. What's with the name? Asked Aereon. You know, for you, that's actually a decent question, said Cole. It's a great story. Aereon, grab the king a chair, would you? Said Eden before his partner could continue. They all watched Aereon drag his feet until he disappeared into the junk pile. So, Eden and I were thinking, what does the Floyncy do? Where are they? Came Aereon's raised and rigid voice. Where they always are, shouted Eden. I have no idea, replied the king, on the edge of his... never mind. They float right, continued Cole, but they also... Whoa! The three turned to see Aereon gliding one-footed between two heaps on one of the creator's earlier inventions, a rolling board. It wasn't a huge success, mainly because the creator's shack was one of the few places in Krank where you could stand without being on sand. After a loud crash, Cole finished. Have buoyancy. So what do you get when you cross buoyancy and float? Boat? Suggested the king. Well, yes, I suppose so. But we thought floyancy. Boat just doesn't have enough grandeur to it, explained Cole. Ah, said Codrich in realisation. What a novel idea. Very clever, chaps. There was the sound of a variety of metallic objects hitting wooden flooring. A few moments later, Aereon staggered out of the towering junk maze. Clutched in his shaking hands was a chair. He shuffled over to the trio. Hey, you found one, said Eden, genuinely amazed. However, it seems to be irrelevant now, as we've just finished the story, and Cole and I need to prepare for the launch. Just put it back where you found it, he slapped Aereon on the back. Actually, boys, do you mind holding off on the launch until tomorrow? Why? Asked Cole, being one of the three people on the island who could say that word to Codrich and not have follow-up questions like, why don't I have a tongue anymore? Although you would probably need a piece of paper or a pencil to express that one. It occurs to me this will be quite a big event, said the king. I think it's worthwhile gathering everyone together, get some publicity to show off what you've achieved. At my instruction, of course. The creators seemed to like this idea, and both nodded in agreement. Excellent, I shall make the arrangements. Outside, the king breathed in the fresh air deeply. The sun was setting and the bustle of Krank was slowing down. With a smile on his face, he rubbed his hands together and set off. Aereon walked at his heels. When the king headed for his home, Aereon peeled off to do the same. Aereon, said Codrich. Yes, my liege. Don't you have more work to do with that whole numbers thing? There was a sigh.